They laughed at him because of the color of his skin and because they thought they could get away with it. Officer Burns saw Elijah Turner, a young black boy riding home from basketball practice, and assumed guilt without evidence, assumed silence, assumed surrender. But he was wrong, because when they picked Elijah, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know his father was a decorated Special Forces operative, a man who had fought for a country that still doubted his worth. And what came next wasn't just justice, it was a reckoning. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one boy. It's about all of us. The night was heavy with the hum of patrol car engines. Streetlights flickered against the quiet houses, casting trembling shadows across the sidewalk. Behind drawn curtains, neighbors watched in silence as a confrontation on a suburban street was about to shift from humiliation to undeniable truth. The cruiser's sirens had barely faded when Officer Barnes stepped out, his boots crunching heavily against the gravel. In the sharp cut of twilight, the red and blue strobes washed the suburban street in restless color. And there, beneath the trembling shadow of the oak trees, stood Elijah, skin dark as rich earth, hands raised slightly in instinctive defense. "Special Forces, huh?" Barnes barked out a laugh, bitter and cutting, as he tightened his grip around Elijah's thin wrist. "You expect me to believe that, kid?" Elijah met his gaze without flinching. His heart pounded, but he refused to let the fear show. "Respect yourself, even when others won't." His father's voice echoed in his mind like a lifeline. The neighbors peeked through their curtained windows, half curious, half fearful, their faces ghostly in the flickering lights. No one stepped outside. No one spoke up. Was this the safety their manicured lawns had promised? Barnes leaned in, his breath hot with derision. "Boys like you don't have daddies in the Special Forces. Tell me another one." In that moment, Elijah felt the weight of something much older than himself settle on his small shoulders. The same bitter story played again, just with a new name, a new street, a new night. How many times had this script already been written, before he even learned to read? He gritted his teeth and lifted his chin higher. "My father's coming," he said, voice steady but soft, almost a prayer. Barnes only laughed harder, shaking his head as he reached for the handcuffs clipped to his belt. How quickly do people decide what they believe about you before you even say a word? The question lingered there, heavy as the humid night air, as time seemed to slow, just long enough for something, or someone, to change everything. The memory of the basketball court still clung to Elijah's skin. The sting of the cold metal hoop, the faint smell of asphalt warmed by the sun. His gym bag swung gently from his shoulder, a silent witness to how normal the evening had started. He hadn't even made it 3 blocks from the rec center when the patrol car rolled up, cutting him off at the curb. Tires hissed against the pavement, doors slammed. Then came the questions, sharp and loaded. "Where'd you get that bike, boy?" It was always a question, never an assumption of innocence, always an accusation stitched with fear. Elijah had followed the script drilled into him by years of careful teaching. Stay calm, keep your hands where they can see, speak clearly, never, ever argue. But it hadn't mattered. His quiet voice, his steady answers, none of it had pierced the wall already built in Officer Barnes' mind. To him, Elijah's dark skin was a louder statement than anything Elijah could ever say. "You match the description," Barnes had said, as if that settled everything. Description. What description? Elijah was in his team jersey, sneakers still dusted white with chalk from the court. His bike, his birthday present, gleamed under the streetlights, a beacon of a childhood he was still trying to protect. He hadn't even realized he was holding his breath until Barnes grabbed his wrist, hard, metal handcuffs flashing in the dying light. How do you prove you're not a threat when the very sight of you feels like a threat to them? The question cut deeper than the tightness around his arms. It was the kind of question that didn't have an answer. At least, not one Elijah could give right then, standing alone under the cold judgment of the flashing lights. And somewhere deep in the growing dusk, Elijah whispered again to himself, "My father's coming." The cuffs clinked cold against Elijah's skin, a sound louder than the patrol car's idle engine. Barnes yanked his arms behind him with unnecessary force, his smirk growing wider. It wasn't just disbelief in his father's service. It was mockery, sharp enough to cut. "Special forces?" Barnes repeated, practically sneering the words. "What's next? Your uncle's the president?" Elijah swallowed hard, feeling the hot press of humiliation rise in his throat. He had been taught not to let their words find roots inside him. But tonight, under the buzzing streetlights and the unseen eyes of silent neighbors, it was harder than ever. "My father's coming," he said again, though the words felt smaller now, almost breakable. Barnes shook his head, the laughter dying into something colder. "Kid, guys like you don't have dads like that." The words hung heavy between them, staining the air. Elijah's heart slammed against his ribs, not from fear, but from something fiercer. Anger, grief, defiance. How many lies had been told to boys like him, convincing them they were less before they even had a chance to be more? He bit down on the fury, remembering his father's steady voice. "Don't give them a reason to break you." Still, his hands balled into fists behind his back, the cuffs biting deeper into his wrists. Barnes reached for his radio, his voice casual, almost bored, bringing him in for questioning. Suspected theft. Suspected. Always suspected. Never celebrated, never believed. How does it feel to know your truth and have it laughed at anyway? In that suspended moment, Elijah heard it, a low rumble. Tires on asphalt, a presence surging closer. He lifted his head, scanning the horizon with desperate hope. Some storms come quietly before they break open the sky, and Elijah knew this storm was about to arrive. The roar of the engine grew louder, cutting through the night like a blade. Barnes stiffened, his hand instinctively hovering near the butt of his holstered gun. A black SUV, sleek and imposing, skidded to a stop just behind the patrol car, its tires carving angry lines into the asphalt. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Every breath, every sound swallowed whole by the tension snapping in the air. The driver's door swung open with a creak of worn hinges, and from the shadows stepped a man who moved like a storm contained inside human skin. His boots struck the pavement with slow, deliberate weight, the fabric of his tactical jacket catching the light just enough to hint at authority, carved from something deeper than badges or titles. Elijah's knees almost buckled in relief. "Dad," he breathed. Barnes spun around fully now, his voice faltering. "Sir, this is police business." The man's gaze didn't waver. He moved closer, calm and unhurried, every inch of him radiating control, a kind of control Barnes could never hope to imitate. His eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, locked onto the officer with a gravity that forced even the night to hold its breath. "My business," he said, voice low but carrying, "is protecting my son." How do you confront authority when it's already decided it knows who you are? Barnes opened his mouth to argue but faltered when the man reached inside his jacket and pulled out a military ID, flashing it with practiced precision. Under the glare of the street lights, the insignia gleamed. A rank not just earned, but fought for. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Sometimes, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand tall. And Elijah, standing cuffed and bruised, felt the first crack split through the weight pressing down on his chest. His father was here. The night had shifted. Officer Barnes's eyes flickered from the military ID to the man holding it. The polished badge, the array of commendations etched into the card. They weren't something you could fake. His smirk dissolved into something smaller, tighter, almost ashamed. Beside him, his partner approached cautiously, sensing the balance of power had shifted in ways no badge or blue uniform could command. "We received a report," the partner began, voice clipped, "about a stolen bike. The kid fit the description. The man. Elijah's father folded his ID slowly, deliberately, and slipped it back into his jacket. His movements were precise, measured. A man who had learned to wield silence as a weapon. Description, he repeated, each syllable slicing into the cool night air. He took one step forward. Barnes flinched, but didn't back away. Elijah's father didn't need to raise his voice. It was the controlled fury in his calmness that made the street itself seem to hold its breath. "You want to run my ID too?" he asked, voice steady as stone. "What does it say about a world where proof of worth must be carried like armor?" Barnes's mouth opened, then closed. His fingers twitched nervously near his belt. For a brief, burning moment, the officer looked not like a figure of authority, but like a boy caught lying, stripped of the costume he wore to feel powerful. The night crackled with something dangerous and electric, but Elijah's father never lost his composure. That, perhaps, was his greatest defiance. Sometimes real power isn't in how loud you speak, but in how utterly you refuse to bow. A beat passed. Barnes swallowed hard, the weight of his mistake sinking visibly into his shoulders. The laughter was gone now, only fear and recognition remained. And Elijah, watching the exchange, realized he was witnessing something he would carry for the rest of his life. The silence grew heavier, stretching across the street like a taut wire ready to snap. Officer Barnes shifted awkwardly on his feet, the confidence he had worn so easily before, now peeling away in layers. His hand trembled slightly as he fumbled for the keys on his belt. "No need for this to escalate," he muttered, almost pleading. Elisha's father didn't blink. His voice cut through the officer's words, steady and cold. "Then uncuff my son, now!" It wasn't a request. It was a command forged from years of having to demand basic respect on battlefields abroad and, more painfully, on the streets of his own country. Barnes hesitated a fraction too long. The message was clear. Compliance wasn't his instinct, it was his last resort. With stiff fingers, the officer unlocked the cuffs. They fell away from Elijah's wrists with a muted clatter, a sound too soft to match the gravity of the moment. Elijah cradled his aching wrists, feeling the ghost of the steel that had bound him. How many times must dignity be returned, only after it has been stripped away? He didn't look at Barnes. He didn't need to. Shame did its own work better than any words could. The patrol car door slammed shut. Barnes and his partner climbed inside without another word, their faces pale, their radios crackling with static that no longer sounded like authority, only retreat. The cruiser rolled away, leaving behind a street that felt somehow heavier for all it had revealed. Elijah stood frozen for a moment, the world tilting strangely around him. His father's hand came down gently on his back, grounding him. Sometimes, survival is not about winning the battle, it's about standing your ground long enough for the truth to be seen. And as the flashing lights disappeared into the night, Elijah let himself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long, trembling shadows as Elijah and his father began their slow walk home. The night air was thick with a silence that clung to Elijah's skin, heavier than the humid breeze that drifted through the quiet suburb. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the scuff of their shoes against the cracked sidewalk. Elijah clutched the strap of his gym bag tighter, the bruises on his wrists throbbing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Finally, his voice broke the stillness, small and raw. "Dad, why is it always like this?" His father didn't answer right away. His step stayed measured, his gaze fixed ahead, as if weighing every word he might say. Elijah waited, hoping for something, an explanation, a reason, anything that could make sense of the humiliation he had just endured. They passed a house where porch lights glowed warmly behind drawn curtains. Behind those windows, families laughed, watched television, ate dinner. What did it feel like to live in a world where you didn't have to prove your right to simply exist? His father finally spoke, voice low but unshakable. Because some people, he said, need proof before they respect you. Elijah frowned, chewing on the bitter truth of it. His father's words weren't angry. They were heavy, carved from too many years of lived experience. But, his father added, pausing to place a hand firmly on Elijah's shoulder, you don't owe them that proof. The words landed deeper than any accusation ever had, like a seed planted somewhere inside him that he knew would take root over time. How do you carry yourself in a world that demands your worth be proven over and over again? Elijah didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he walked on, matching his father's steady pace, feeling the lessons of the night settle into his bones, heavier but somehow clearer than before. They moved under the dim glow of the street lamps, the night slowly reclaiming its calm. The confrontation behind them felt like a different world. A battlefield invisible to everyone who hadn't lived through it. His lips parted to reveal his naked chest. He wore an ogre's face symbol, a life of crime and horror. Elijah stole a glance at his father, watching the rigid set of his jaw, the way his shoulders stayed square even though the danger had passed. His father's uniform wasn't stitched from cloth tonight. It was stitched from dignity, worn like second skin. For the first time, Elijah understood something he hadn't been able to name before. His father's strength wasn't just in the medals tucked away in some forgotten drawer, or the salutes offered by other men in uniform. It was in how he stood, unbending, in the face of doubt and disdain. Strength, Elijah realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't fists or shouted words. It was the quiet, stubborn insistence on one's own humanity. When the world questions who you are, how do you answer without losing yourself? Ahead of them, the sidewalk forked toward their modest home. A small, sturdy place Elijah had never fully appreciated until now. Every crack in its foundation, every weathered step, spoke of battles fought, not just abroad but right here, every day. The porch light was on, spilling a soft halo onto the walkway. His father squeezed Elijah's shoulder gently, a silent reminder that he was not alone. They crossed into the circle of light together. The night closed behind them, carrying the echoes of what had happened, but not defining them. Sometimes survival isn't just about walking away. It's about walking forward, carrying the truth of who you are. And as Elijah stepped over the threshold, he knew he wasn't just his father's son. He was the heir to a strength that no accusation, no laughter, no pair of handcuffs could ever take away. There are moments in life when the world will look at you and see only what it expects to see. They may doubt your worth, question your place, or treat your dignity as something to be earned. But true strength, the kind that endures, doesn't come from shouting back or proving them wrong on their terms. It comes from standing quietly in who you are. Knowing your value doesn't need their permission. Sometimes, respect is not given freely. Sometimes it is withheld until a uniform, a title, or a badge forces the world to look twice. But even then, the deeper victory is not in their recognition. It is in the quiet, steady refusal to be broken by their doubt. As we grow older, perhaps we see more clearly. The real battles are not the ones fought with anger, but the ones endured with grace. Holding your head high, walking forward even when misunderstood. That is a strength that cannot be taken away. And in doing so, we teach the next generation that their worth was never up for debate. The real power that night wasn't in the flash of badges or the sound of raised voices. It was in the quiet strength of a father standing beside his son, refusing to let the world diminish him. No applause marked their victory. No headlines would tell their story. But in the stillness, something unshakable was passed down. A belief that dignity, once claimed, could never be taken away again. Life didn't change overnight. Elijah would still face the long, slow work of rebuilding trust in a world that too often demanded proof of his worth, But now he carried something different inside him. The memory of standing tall, the knowledge that justice begins in small, stubborn acts of survival. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.